What did you do? Did you break it?
Okay, we are officially live streaming and recording.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I want to welcome everybody to the Tuesday, August 15th, City of Wildwood Planning and Parks Committee meeting. Our chair, Mr. Galani, is with us via Zoom, but wasn't able to be here for in person. So I will be chairing the meeting in his absence, and we will start with a roll call.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ottenberg.
Here.
Councilmember Marshall. Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell. Councilmember Flasher is absent. And we have a quorum.
Okay, you didn't ask if I was here, but I am.
Sorry, acting chair Barbatoni.
No, right.
Right.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, the approval of minutes. I have a motion for that. So moved by Councilmember Marshall, seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. That takes us there. Next item is public input. I see Deborah attending. Deborah, are you wanting to speak? If you are, can you raise your hand? Oh, she does. Okay, so let's move her over to a panelist. Give us a second, Deborah. Okay, it looks like you are ready, Deborah, but you are muted right now.
Yeah, Chair Bartoni, I don't want to speak the second, but I did want to be available in case I did want to make a comment.
Okay, but just not right now?
Correct.
Okay, just raise your hand when you're ready. Okay, thank you. All right, that takes us to the action items. We have 4 planning matters and 6 park matters. The first planning matter under new business is the sound mitigation pilot program. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, the department had prepared for your consideration tonight a memorandum relative to this agenda item. And in conjunction with the memorandum, we did take the liberty to provide you the sound study that was completed by Dr. Thunder and his son, Steve. There are a couple of components to that sound study that are applicable to the conversation tonight as well. And those are the graphics that Melanie's kindly loaded onto the system and will use for the purposes of discussion. So thank you. In the memorandum, the department noted that for the most part during 2022 and the beginning of 2023, the committee discussed at length the sound issue or noise issue along Route 100 and Route 109. The origin of this discussion was a ward meeting that was held for Ward 5, and a number of residents, both those in existing subdivisions and those in Brightleaf, identified the amount of sound or noise coming off the corridors and just concerns about the quality of life. Without data and information, there was only those comments that were available for us to make decisions on. The committee ultimately agreed to do the analysis, which is the product that's attached to the memorandum. And we discovered that although there is only one area, and that area is along Route 100 in the Evergreen subdivision, none of the others exceed the most stringent standard, which is from the Environmental Protection Agency. But as you can see, although they may not be in that dark red zone and exceed that threshold in terms of decibel level, there are many homes that are very close to it and certainly do have impactful sound or noise. The consultant came up with a list of solutions, some of them very practical, and some from the standpoint of the city, probably not implementable. Like, for example, creating a 300 to 500-foot buffer from the edge of right-of-way along Route 100 and Route 109. As you could see, that would probably, from the standpoint of some of our town center developments, make the properties unusable. However, as we kind of whittled down that discussion to its conclusion, there was a desire to continue forward and maybe do some sort of pilot program. First and foremost, for that area of the Evergreen subdivision, those 4 or 5 houses that back to Route 100 by Taylor Road and Route 100, and future development. And as you know, last night we discussed the Crestview project. We've also had at the Development and Zoning Review Committee a project by Fisher Frickel on that northeast corner of Route 109 and Route 100. And from that perspective, very much so a concern relative to sound. So tonight, the department has prepared for you a couple of things. First, we have been implementing some of those recommendations already with the assistance and support of City Council. As you know, we have been planting additional trees along the Route 100, Route 109 corridor, getting that started. And that was at the urging of the mayor with the support of City Council. And those have been planted. We also last night approved the speed reduction on a portion of Route 109. And again, according to Dr. Thunder, our sound consultant, reducing speed also reduces the decibel level. And then finally, we have our new tree preservation and restoration code regulations that took the grand tree protection and general tree protection to the next level and identified grand tree stands as an area of importance, even if not all of those trees in that stand are 24 inches or greater in size. So we've made some progress, and certainly we'll continue that with the support of City Council. Tonight, however, with the new developments, I think there are some things that we can consider and potentially retroactively add. And when I speak of new developments, I'm speaking of Crestview, the Fisher Frickel project on the northeast corner of the main intersection, and to a degree, the reserve. And from that perspective, the department has recommended that we consider, not necessarily implement yet, but consider that obviously we want to retain the greatest amount of woodlands we can relative to the corridor locations. Although that may not be as good as a sound barrier, a wall, from Dr. Thunder's analysis, it does provide a psychological impact. People don't see the roadway, they see trees. In their assessment, the sound isn't as bad as it might have been. Require more plantings along the corridors. And we discussed this last night at Crestview. Crestview showed a landscape plan. Many of the trees were not scattered, they were strategically placed throughout the development. But from the perspective of the department, knowing what we know, we should put more trees up along Route 100, not decrease overall trees potentially, but more trees so that we create not only a physical barrier, but that psychological benefit. Also, where possible, utilize berms. In some instances, this is practical, and I believe that would be the case on the reserve. We have spacing there, I believe, along Manchester Road and Route 109 to achieve that. On other locations, like the existing problem area by the Evergreen subdivision, there is so much stuff crammed in that space between the shoulder, our trail, and their backyards. I just don't think a berm is practical, but certainly trees. Fourthly, just as best as possible, think about how we place homes. And this is something McBride Homes did. We have the sides of the homes facing the street, the major corridor. Sides of homes typically don't have as many windows. and windows are an opening, so to speak, that allows the transmission of sound. And so from that perspective, placing the homes there, and secondly, putting two-story homes next to the street provides that structural buffer, like a sound wall, and benefits maybe not those that buy the two-story home, but again, they have the side facing, but protects those homes that are behind it or to the rear of it. And then finally, as McBride Homes mentioned last night, just getting a declaration from any buyer that they know that they are close to an arterial roadway and there may be noise associated with it. I do include in this potentially some changes to our codes eventually to improve the building materials used along these corridors, such as windows, doors, and insulation. Again, just all looking at things that can be done with a certain amount of ease and flexibility based upon the circumstance and the information we receive about the levels of sound. So tonight, the department is presenting these options to you and seeking input. Certainly with your input, we can then finalize them and do a little bit more research. And then we'll bring back to you hopefully a final product for potential consideration, either as part of our noise code, our nuisance code, or some building code modifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vanucci. You're not necessarily looking for any action from us tonight, just
No, we're
let's just discuss
intro-
it.
Yeah, pardon me, I interrupted.
No,
you.
you go ahead.
No, we're introducing the concept to you. So tonight, I'd like to hear what you're all thinking. If this is too much, not enough. And certainly, I think there's an opportunity to kind of maybe proceed forward on a few of these things while we have a development that's being considered.
Okay, yeah, and it's definitely timely from the discussion last night as well as the next item. So Katie, go ahead.
From the practicality of our discussion last night, I went ahead this morning at 7:45 to 8:15 or so, and I sat over on the primary road that gets into Brightleaf just to see what the sound was, and just the fact that we left those trees in between their major roadway into it and outside of it. It's not too bad, really. And then as you go further back into the subdivision, you don't really hear much of anything. So, I mean, obviously, if you've got a huge dump truck that's braking at the light at Taylor Road, you're going to hear that. But I think these are a little bit more practical methods to reduce noise. The last thing I want to see from my perspective is those ugly noise walls that are up along Highway 40 that I just don't think really do much of anything anyway. So if we can move forward with the developments that are being planned in this corridor right now with ensuring that they follow these rules, whatever we need to do to enforce them would be great.
Thank you.
I was just curious. I think you mentioned that the area where the sound seems to create the biggest challenge is along the Evergreen subdivision. And also that a berm probably would not be practical there because there just isn't space. So what would be a possible solution to mitigate the sound levels there?
Well, from the perspective of the department, I think the first and most logical choice is to try to get some type of large trees or trees installed that would grow fast and provide a fairly full canopy. That way, again, there is some benefit to sound reduction, not as great as a wall or a berm, but there is some benefit to the decibel level. But again, just psychologically, we're creating that screen. Also, from that perspective, it adds greenery to the corridor, improves the appearance, and certainly provides shade on the trail then. So I would say that would be the first step. And we've tried it, as Ms. Davil mentioned, we've retained trees along that edge of Brightleaf. We added more trees that are native to this area, the cedars, that'll grow pretty fast and are hardy and actually provide habitat then too. So I would say that's the first step. A wall, as we found when we did some analysis when we were going through this back in the end of 2022 and early 2023, they're so expensive. And they may be the most effective tool to the highway planner. But I concur with Ms. Dodwell. They make you feel like you're in a tunnel, and that's not the character I think we want along our roadway system in Wildwood.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. And I share Ms. Dodwell's concern about walls. They would just detract from the whole character of the city that we're trying to preserve. Thank you.
Teresa, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking this over and first we want to mitigate noise, not sound. But when we're doing this, I think it's a prime time for us to look at this, an overarching look at this. And we have these specific instances that we're looking at right now with 100 and 109. But if we put together we use this as a pilot planning time so that we can put together a process of failure modes and effects analysis. So we have something to go by every time that this comes up. We have a process that we go through, that we have a source list of all the sources in the city that we can think of. Of course, there'll be others, but things that we have had problems with in the past, and how we assess the noise level of each one of those, the impact it has on the environment or on the people, and our thresholds, make sure that we have those all developed, and strategies that noise prevention and strategies like we're doing for this particular case. And as well, we need metrics or some way to measure how we've been successful or not successful. And we need a training, some kind of training, so that we can teach, I mean, not only us on what we're doing, but the residents on how to maybe reduce on their own or prevent noise in their neighborhood. And then a review time where we monitor what we've done on a periodic basis so that we can come back and make sure that our mitigation is working. And of course, communication, documentation, all of that goes along with it. But I just think that this is a perfect time to look at what the city has, the department has, all of the work they've put into it, and Dr. Thunder and his son, and come up with a good plan so that next time we don't have to do this again. We can just go through our plan step by step, and we already have a list of possible mitigation measures for whatever the sound that's causing the noise is. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Teresa. Rod, go ahead. Deborah, I got you next. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I have sort of expressed the opinion before that if you buy next to a highway, you kind of have to expect some road noise, and there have been observations, legitimate observations, that yeah, the roundabouts may have increased the traffic because of the braking, or the noise because of the braking and so on and so forth. But as Dr. Thunder mentioned, electric vehicles are coming on and they are reducing the sound. And so I don't know, we're certainly not going to build any walls or anything like that, but I think we do have some opportunities to improve things for residents in the future. But I first have a question about that resident sign-off concept that they brought up about the development there at Crestview. Does that have any legs? I mean, is that used in, elsewhere? Because it seems to me that folks will buy and then sort of regret at leisure and complain to the city because the noise has ramped up. It's happened probably in Brightleaf and those kinds of things, at least to some extent. What do you think about that, Joe? Does that make any sense for the city as an indemnification?
It's not necessarily to the benefit of the city. It's more to the developer, in my opinion.
Kind of what I thought. Yeah.
The developer then can say, we've advised our buyers, the buyers were aware, so don't hold us harmless for the situation. In the instance of the recommendation, this is more of a sound easement kind of situation that's been utilized in the area of Spirit of St. Louis Airport, where they actually create as part of a platting process, an airport easement over the development, which for all intents and purposes, this isn't carried with the property. And that gets the first buyer plus any buyer or subsequent buyers thereafter.
So we can do that.
Yeah.
And that makes tons of sense to me. Not only for the development we discussed last night, but also for the reserve. And so is that in flight? Are we going to develop something like that, or?
Again, given direction tonight, we'll certainly can sit down with the city attorney and discuss this. There's, like I say, there's a template out there for the airport. We've seen that the airport implemented that after years of receiving complaints that I bought a house here. I didn't realize there was an airport down there. That kind of thing. So,
Okay. Yeah. So I think that will be one recommendation that I would have, is for you guys to pursue that just for future developments, where we're not going to impose that on Evergreen and Brightleaf and so forth after the fact, but it makes sense if in the future to just protect the city from people that come in and complain, because it'll be, they signed a document and they saw the documents before they bought the home. So I don't think the reserve topology supports berms just the way it slopes down to the roads. That's my personal opinion. Yours is different, but I do think, trees are a great thing. They're cheap and they have a lot of other benefits if we can get them to live. So the trick would be making sure that we're planting them in place, planting the right species in the right places and so forth. But I think that's a great thing for the city, because they have tons of other benefits, just the aesthetics for everybody driving by, the shading of the trails and so on and so forth. So that would be another strong recommendation. But the third thing is something that we've talked about in the relatively recent past, about just building techniques and materials, as you suggested. I don't know how much we can dictate to the developers, but we did talk about changing our code. There are tons of sound mitigation techniques that really help, especially on the side that faces the road, as you mentioned. And so I don't know. I don't know how practical it is for the city to talk about managing custom codes with the county. We decided that might be more trouble than it's worth. But if we could have one of our requests to developers that they come to us with plans that include sound mitigation, just like they have to do with drainage, that makes a lot of sense to me. So that would be another recommendation. And that's all I got. And thanks, everybody.
thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Deborah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear the city's already engaged in sound prevention. I really appreciate that. I agree with what Teresa had to say, and it does seem the roundabouts have made a tremendous difference. And one thing that I'm concerned about with the new apartment development is they're going to have 11 houses sitting right there on the roundabout. And even if you make an agreement and have them sign it and say, well, yeah, we know it's going to create a lot of noise about the roundabout. What happens when the original owner moves and then a buyer comes in and the original owner doesn't notify the new buyer? But the roundabouts really seem to be a problem as far as sound goes. I know Mr. Garantano has mentioned concerns about the roundabouts in his area and how the residents, especially at Canberry, are concerned about the noise. As far as Villages of Brightleaf goes, there used to be, as we know, they were all woodlands. And you can actually hear the sound of the traffic all the way back to the T turnaround. It's maybe not constant, but you certainly can. And I think that's got to do with all the woodlands that were removed. So I agree with everybody. The more woodlands we can create, the more, you know, trees along 100, 109, anywhere around a roundabout. That certainly is something that we can do. I mean, we spend $1 million plus on roundabouts. And in the past, I don't think we knew or, you know, even thought about sound. But I think that's something we should look at. And I agree that we should maybe put something in our code about other sound mitigation, like the materials used to construct the house. But I'm really concerned about the apartments and then the housing development right there that's going to go on the roundabout. And I don't know how much space there is there, Joe. Can you know, a berm, what can you do to mitigate that?
Well, I think I have some good news about the single family component of Greenberg Development's proposal. With the engagement of Green Street as the multiple family developer, they've actually rethought that whole project layout within the confines of the ordinance. And fortunately, more green space has been added down by the single family dwellings, and we have more flexibility now in terms of their placement. The original plan by Stock and Associates, as you know, Ms. McCutcheon, had them very, very close to the edge of property. I think we're going to see them move back a pretty good distance, not 300 feet, but there's going to be more green space. And the department, I should say, has had conversations with Mr. Cohn just about the concern about the quality of life there. So it's on our radar.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other comments, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you. Teresa, go ahead, and Katie, I got you next. Okay.
Yeah, talking about all about the trees has made me start thinking about what we did see on that development plan over at Crestview. And, you know, I look at it and the existing trees, it looks like they will all be eliminated and they'll be planting new trees in their place. I mean, like in my neighborhood, the houses are built and take away as few trees as possible. And so we have a lot of trees in our yards. Why is it that, I mean, I know it's probably more practical for building to just strip it down and to be able to build, but isn't it possible for them to leave trees that are existing in the yards?
Ms. Clark, I can give you just two examples of why it's difficult in the, let's say, suburban town center areas versus the non-urban residential area. And those two reasons are stormwater management and the design of roads. So in the non-urban areas, for the most part, given the size of lots, we are not as concerned. We're concerned, but not as concerned what happens when it rains and where that water goes. Typically, there's at least 2.5, if not 2 3/4 acres of ground to absorb that. In the other areas, that's not the case. So every precipitation event, every rain, we basically have to manage that because we know there's nowhere else to go because of impervious surface. So the MSD and the city, to a certain degree, manipulate the site to ensure that the water gets to those areas for collection. The other is just street grades in the non-urban residential areas. As you know, street grades generally aren't managed. And we have specifications, but they can be up to 15, 16%, which is steep. In town center, we're talking about anywhere from 3 to 5%. And so it's just a matter of the amount of traffic and ensuring that if they're safe streets for that amount of traffic, given the density. So that's at least two I can give you as an example.
Thank you. Katie, go ahead.
I just had a quick question. I'm trying to understand, is a roundabout causing more noise than a stop, start kind of roadway?
That's what we're hearing from some of the residents in the vicinity. And again, as Ms. McCutcheon relayed, she's been hearing it from some of her constituents as well as Mr. Garitano. I can tell you we've not done a study, at least the Department of Planning has not, to verify that that's the case or not. And the problem is all the roundabouts have been installed now, so we wouldn't have the pre-development condition to kind of set that base and then determine what the increase is. Again,
Well, you could look at different locations like Clayton and Strucker and the stoplight there. And when all of those cars go through, everybody's got to rev up their engines and move on through. So I'm just curious as to why it's being presumed that it's noisier now that the roundabouts are in place, because that was part of the reason that we wanted to put them in, is to reduce the noise and reduce the pollution and reduce the traffic. So I'm just curious.
well, we can certainly investigate that. I'll pass it on to Mr. Brown tomorrow, that question arose, and maybe there already is some studies out there that we can access and provide to all of you.
Yes.
Yeah, mine's not technical, but walking every morning on the trail, I can tell you that the roundabout at 109 and 100, it's not because of the roundabout, it's because of the egress coming up off of 100 to get up there, and the trucks are going to downshift and everything else. But if it were a stop sign, it would be just as bad. At least as they slow down, you're not getting that acceleration. So the roundabout, I think it's getting into the roundabout, at least right there, because you can be walking and I can just tell I have to turn my headset up, because if a truck's coming, it starts to accelerate. You don't blame them. But so I think that's part of it. I think the elevation of getting into the roundabout is probably more of the noise related part than some of the others. Just a couple other things. Years ago, before Brightleaf ever existed and before anything in town center, we walked all of these fields. And I can remember everybody walking over there saying, who would ever buy a house here? You couldn't even talk walking through the fields on both sides. And then how many developments originally wanted to come into town center and said, nobody's going to buy an apartment facing out to 100 with the road noises there. So, those are just some of the issues that you're just going to deal with the highway, and everybody does it all over the world. So I don't think it's that different. I think all of those suggestions are great. The other thing I think will continue to happen, how many have ever had to buy and replace a dishwasher? The new ones, you can't even know that, you don't even know they're running. And the old ones, it's like, well, don't turn that on while we're entertaining. So I just think obviously things are getting a lot better. Windows are better, doors are better, but turning the houses sideways, I think that's great. The other thing on the trees, I think that we need, as we do it, communicate it, tell them what kind of tree to put in and then how much water these trees need. And I mean, I'm sure we could find people that would be willing to say, oh, wow, I'll put, the 5-gallon bag, I'll go out and put water in or whatever, because unfortunately the good, healthy trees, they need to be taken care of as they grow in that particular way. But I think that all of these steps are just perfect to put out there in order to get people to be aware that there's a lot that can be done that way. And if you remember on Clarkson Road, they worked really hard. Clarkson Valley tried. They were trying to put different types of asphalt down for to quiet the noise. They had to put walls up. They ended up going with the dirt mounds because the walls were not going to do it. That asphalt that was airport runway asphalt didn't quiet it down. And so the same issue. It's not something new, but I think any of these steps that we take really will help build out and get the trees and telling the builders how to do it the right way, I think would be a good move. So I'm in favor of all those. And if you need a motion, I'm happy to make it, but we'll go on with the discussion.
Thank you, Ed. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, just follow on to what the last couple of folks have said. First of all, I want to make it clear that I'm a big fan of roundabouts. They do reduce pollution, reduce fuel consumption, and they reduce everybody's travel time overall, because you don't have to stop and sit and wait, particularly in the middle of the evening when there's nobody else there. So they have their advantages. The complaints, though, about sound have to do, I looked into this a little bit when we were arguing about it before, and it has to do with some of what Mr. Marshall said, but also just the exhaust vectors themselves. People are going around the corner and their exhaust is suddenly pointing at your house instead of directly behind the vehicle, which makes a ton of difference with today's vehicles. And the other thing is the dynamic braking. If a truck is coming up to one, a lot of times they will just downshift a couple of gears, and everybody knows that sound. And those are the two problems. But I think both of those are going to get a whole lot better in the next few years as we move to more of an EV based fleet. So those are just general comments.
Okay, thank you. So good discussion. Got what you need, I guess, or?
Yes. With
Okay,
the Permission of the committee, Travis and Melanie, I'll take the information we have. We'll get something formed to you and get it back to you in September.
okay. The only thing I would want to add is concerning Crestview. Maybe at the next council meeting, if like that grid that they presented, maybe if we had that over, like an overlay of that over like a Google view of it today, so that we just had a better understanding of what trees are going to go away that we know of and what trees there's a possibility of preserving, just so that council has a idea of like what is going to happen there.
Certainly, you were all painted a pretty picture last night by the petitioner. What I will tell you is, as Dr. Rambo has mentioned, there aren't, and others, that there aren't many of their existing woodlands that are to remain. There are some tricks that we can use, though. Obviously, the width of roadways is a key component, but in town center, we do allow lesser width roads, which means moving the right of way in, narrowing the road a bit, which again makes for safer streets. If you believe that philosophy, we get more space and we can save more trees. And it's particularly necessary, in the opinion of the department, appropriate along Route 100 and wherever we can on the Etherton roadside. So I think there's some tricks, just things that I would think a petitioner wouldn't object to because it's less cost to them, but gives us more opportunity to save trees and create space.
Great. And the only other comment, I'm a fan of roundabouts also. I hate stop and go traffic, but I'm sure we have, I don't want to like do something because it's going to be very hard to, if you do a sound study at a roundabout today, we probably don't have anything accurate from before the roundabout. But, you know, I think there's roundabouts planned right now at 109 in BA. There's also 109 in Wild Horse. We might already have an existing sound study in those areas. We put a roundabout in and then you do another sound study a year after that. And, you know, I mean, the data is going to be a couple years apart, but at least we're not having to do a new study and then.
I actually think the state may be required to do that noise or sound analysis.
Yeah,
so
they might be doing it already.
I'll pass that on to Rick and see if we got something.
Okay, great. That takes us to the next item on the agenda. This is a pretty appropriate transition to tree preservation and restoration codes. Mr. Vunich.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, as you know, recently the new regulations for our tree preservation and restoration code were approved by all of you, along with your peers. Those regulations, I like to think, addressed a lot of shortcomings that existed just because of the age of the regulations, not necessarily the intent or certainly the enforcement. As part of that process, the department noted that the regulations were the first step, and that there are two components that form a second step, and that is our existing landscape manual, which has not been updated since 1996, and our sustainable planning's guide. Tonight, the department would like authorization to pursue some bids from outside consultants to basically assist the departments, both Public Works and Planning, and the committee in the development of what I would like to offer is a single document instead of two, a document that's a bit of on a diet through more graphics than text, using outside consultants to help us, including a graphic designer. And then finally, try to complete the process by the first quarter of 2024. I think it's imperative we prioritize as we see more development in town center, and as well as some redevelopment in other areas of the city. So tonight, the department is respectfully requesting authorization to proceed forward and accept bids from the consulting community to help us in the development of this single document. Thank you.
Great. Does somebody want to make that motion? Katie, you're making that motion. Ed, you're going to second that motion. Okay. Do we have discussion on it as well? Rob, go ahead, and Katie, I'll get you next.
Yeah, just a quick comment. This is very dear to my heart. The question to you is there, would there be a desire on the part of the department for a some sort of a subcommittee to assist with this in addition to the folks, the consultants, the professionals that you're asking to provide input?
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Yeah. From the department's perspective, we deal with consultants, we deal with the application, but we don't necessarily deal with the people that have to address it out with their constituents and things like that. So I actually think that would be a welcome and refreshing breeze through the process, actually.
Okay, so I don't know how we pursue that, but I'm game. This is where I live avocationally and always have. So, and there may be others that are, botany fans up here or elsewhere on the council. So
What I would hope is that at the September meeting, Melanie and Travis will have for you a list of the respondees to our, so to speak, RFQ. Maybe we can have some suggestions on how to form that subcommittee. And that way you can act on both.
great.
You good with that, Rob?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
wonderful. I've already done a lot of work on these books
Yeah.
and a lot of investigation. So that's great.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rob. Katie, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rambo, for offering that suggestion, having stomped down to St. Louis County Council and showed them their inability to handle tree preservation at all with photos, et cetera. I'd be more than happy to assist in that process in whatever way possible. But I guess my question is, do you need a motion? I'll make that motion that
You did
we.
already.
Oh, did I already? Okay. Sorry. I got so excited about what he was saying. I apologize.
For what Rob was talking about, the subcommittee.
Back, I made first. I can change that.
Mhm,
Katie, that can include that motion,
mhm.
that subcommittee together.
Yeah.
You okay with that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think we can do that if we're unanimous.
Yes, I
Yes.
seconded.
Yes. I think if it's, yeah, we haven't voted, so, and I think if it's, we can amend it. Yeah. She just has to agree to the second.
I agree. with the
Agree to, the
second.
second has to agree to the change. That's what I'm trying to say.
I-
Yeah. Yep. Is there any other comments first? Okay, seeing none, we do have a motion on the floor. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. The next item on the agenda under old business is the final draft for the zoning summary sheet. This is what we all asked for. Mr. Vunich, this is yours as well.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as the chair just mentioned, this particular item was presented to the committee at its last meeting in draft form. The department received some very good comments relative to it, and the department incorporated those comments into the content of the draft. Primary amongst those comments was just a disclaimer relative to the sheet and its intended purpose, and certainly isn't meant to be a substitute for any of the additional information that would follow. But hopefully tonight, the format is acceptable. I actually believe that as it gets used more and more, there'll be modifications that come along. But for the purposes of getting our feet on the ground and start that walk, so to speak, the department is respectfully requesting an authorization to proceed forward, test it. We'll refine it, I'm sure, as I've said, but at least get something started so we can see how it works and the benefit it derives. Thank you.
Thank you. So are you looking for a motion to move forward? Does somebody want to make that motion? Made by Councilmember Ottenberg, seconded by Councilmember Rambo. Any comments for the department?
Good job.
Teresa?
Great last night.
Yeah, right. Teresa, go ahead, please.
Thanks. I was gonna second, but I will make a comment. And this is, I know, just picky of me, but the under density, it still says units per acre. We might want to take off either the slash or the per.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You told me that. I apologize.
No problem.
Anything else, Teresa? Is that it? Okay,
That's
any
it.
other comments or questions for the department? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. That takes us to the next item with the recent development trends. This is typically an FYI for us from the department, but open to any questions or comments. Seeing none, that closes out the planning matters and takes us to park matters. We will start with the Gateway Off-Road Cycle sign. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you'll recall at our July meeting, representatives of Gateway Off-Road Cyclists attended and for the most part provided a very brief presentation about a desire they have to install what I consider an informational sign at Bluffview Park. Based upon your visits to Bluffview Park, I'm sure you know now that it is a very popular place, both for cyclists of all types, equestrian on occasion, and certainly walkers and runners and hikers. The Bluffview Trail system has been expanded over time from its original plan, which was just a single track trail around for the most part, the perimeter, take you from the parking lot down to the Al Foster Memorial Trail. It's much more now. And certainly, as we're finding, it's drawing users from not just the Wildwood area, the metropolitan area, but from outstate areas as well. And so from the perspective of the organization and the department, along with this committee, which endorsed it, it is something that would be, I think, well received. In response to that support from the committee, the department asked the park designer that has worked on both phases at Bluffview Park to basically put together a flat plan, a site plan, and then, for the most part, the components of the sign. And tonight, the department is presenting those to you for your consideration and comment. And from that whole point, once comments are provided, the department would like to, for the most part, present this to Gateway Off-Road Cyclists, because I'm showing it to the committee first. And then if acceptable to them or with minor modification, bid the sign out and see what we end up with in terms of a cost so we can discuss it during the budget process this coming fall. The only other item I would mention to the committee, there are two concepts for the sign. The first has the sign at a lower height than the column tops, and that's concept one. The other has it at a higher height, like shown in the rendering. So from that perspective, if you have any thoughts, which looks better to you all, the department is fine with either, but certainly would want your opinion on either concept. Mr. Chair, that's the presentation. Again, if there are any questions, the department would be glad to respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe, are you looking for a motion or just any feedback before you present it to Gork?
A motion to proceed forward if Gork, for the most part, has minimal comments.
Okay. Does somebody
Obviously,
wanna-
if they want something completely different, we'll be back.
Right. Somebody want to make that motion? Scott, you want to make that motion? Have a comment? Okay. Do we have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Rambo. Scott, go ahead. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, Joe, I'm having a little trouble getting my bearings on the exact location. I was aesthetically, I prefer, as Scott meant, this same configuration that Scott mentioned, But if it's going to be there where Gork is planning to help us remove invasives and so forth so that we get a better view of a long view of the valley, it might be nice to consider having it a little lower so you can see over it. So can you tell me where this, I'm looking at the map, but I'm kind of lost.
So do my best. So this is the parking lot area.
Okay, so that's where the ice cream was. Okay,
So the sign is far distance into the trail system from the parking lot area. And the sign is at that critical junction where you go either onto the trail or you go over to the hub that takes you to the system of challenge.
okay, yeah, I know just where it is now. So I vote with Scott. You can keep the weeds out from under it and it's not going to grow up and it's not going to get water damage. My question to you is, I love the aesthetic of the angled sign, but I'm wondering about weather.
Yes, obviously it does put it more to, so to speak, the rain, the wind, the sun. We have the materials we've used for our city entry signs is a plastic compound, and they've held up well. That would be my guess here, that we would use something that's very durable and weather resistant. And from that perspective too, they're also better from a vandalism standpoint. They're easier to clean and they're hard. They're rock solid.
Okay, great.
I'll get you more information on what we've used in the past to kind of work.
Well, I don't need it as long as you're on top of it. And evidently we already thought about it, so we're good. Thank you.
I'll tell you, Mr. Keitel thought about it, not me, so I'll give credit where credit is due.
Thank you, Rob. Teresa, go ahead. And Katie, I get.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Vintage, I'm just wondering, I don't see on the sign that we have in front of us the braille on this informational sign. Especially since we're talking about, a place where people can travel down and back on a pretty flat surface. Can you tell me how we're going to implement braille on this sign?
Well, certainly that is a key component. It's an omission on my part, but I can guarantee both Ms. Clark and the committee will add braille as we do on other signage that provides information at our other parts. The question I'll have is just the components of it. I don't know if the sign needs to be enlarged to accommodate it, but we'll certainly have braille as a component of the sign. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
I just want to make sure as we are developing the sign content that we put some history about the location, what had been in the area, and some of the types of either indigenous peoples or settlers that had moved through the area, so that visitors to the park can get some history about the area. The trail system maps are great, but a lot of people, when we were having our open house or our ribbon cutting ceremony, a lot of people were walking around going, I wonder how long this stuff's been here and where did those posts come from, and questions like that. So some history, I think, would be helpful.
Certainly, that was something the Gork representatives kind of relayed to Mr. Keitel when he contacted them to get some additional information about the sign. And I also think it's important that users understand that the city's done the work here, not necessarily St. Louis County. Oftentimes, I think like the Cave Trailhead, Chesterfield's got a great trailhead here. And it's like, well, it's not Chesterfield, it's Wildwood, and we did it, not them. So I think that's a key component of kind of the property history too, how we ended up with it and what we've done to make it a great place.
Ed, go ahead.
Could some of that be done on a QR code so that you could have all of that data on there so people could just kind of walk up and pull the history off and do it
Probably get even more information.
more than they want?
Right.
Mr. Marshall, I think what you're saying is maybe we provide a teaser there that kind of gets their interest and say, for more
Yeah.
information, scan the QR code.
There you go. Right. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, real quickly. We spoke about QR codes in the Historic Preservation Commission meetings pursuant to the Madison Valley Confederate Soldiers Memorial. And I think as this, maybe you should take as a sort of a strategic thought or initiative, if there's some way for us to buy inexpensive, replicatable QR code sign that we can just stick in the ground or stick on our signs or whatever. And we can, I think the historic preservation folks can add a lot of that history. Just people walk up and they get used to, people are more and more used to just scan this code on your phone, as Mr. Marshall suggested. And we could do a lot with that at very low cost. And both evangelize that this is Wildwoods and not Eureka's, and tell people more about the history, which is, always great to do. So maybe you can look into that. I don't think it can't be that expensive. And as technology changes, I don't think we want to attach a QR code to our sign, because in 5 years there may be something else.
Yeah, and in this particular instance, I think the approach would be is to have not a standalone sign, but a wood post next to or in the vicinity of, and the post would be a complement to the sign. And from the perspective of the department, if it is then damaged, it's easy to replace. And so from that perspective, it provides the information, but it isn't necessarily a component of the sign that can't ever be removed unless the sign is removed itself and replaced.
Yeah, and in a few years, it could be, people could be used to, oh, there's the little Wildwood logo on a post, and there's the QR code. That means I can learn some history. And I think it would be a great thing over time to try to do that. So thanks for the suggestion,
Thank you.
Ed.
Deborah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think the QR code is an excellent idea. We used it for some different organizations through work, and they really aren't that expensive. I mean, we actually even made our own, and so did some of the other organizations. My concern is GORC going to contribute to the cost of this sign? Is this going to be, all on the city? Is it going to be a partnership?
I believe, Ms. McCutcheon, it's going to be a partnership in that GORC will probably recover the columns, restore the columns, and set the columns in place. And from that perspective, then the sign would be the component that the city would cover, so to speak, and then its installation. So I think we'll get in-kind contributions from GORC, which in principle have a great value. And then from the perspective of the department, as they've done elsewhere, I think GORC will bring maintenance to the sign and care, because they'll be out there more often than any of our maintenance crew would be on any given day. So I'd like to see the front end and say the back end of this process will be GORC, and we'll be able to manufacture the sign to the standard and quality we want and ensure it's all installed safely.
Okay, well, we have a motion on the floor. Don't see any other comments or questions. So all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you, everyone. That takes us to the next item under park matters, the winterizing the restrooms. Ms. Ripito.
Make it easier. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As we have previously discussed a few times, the city has been exploring the possibility of upgrading the restroom. Oh, I'm on the wrong. There. Right. We'll try that one on the next presentation. the department has been exploring the possibility of upgrading the restroom facility at Green Pines Park so it could be used year round. At the April meeting, the department presented a bid cover from Demeen Construction, the firm that originally constructed the park, for heating the restroom facility. And the committee members noted the cost was a little high and requested a cost breakdown, which was provided. And that led to a discussion of, well, if that's how much it costs to heat just the utility closet, not the actual restroom, then how much would it be to heat the entire restroom? And so since that last meeting, the department has reached out for additional proposals for heating both the costs of the restroom and the utility closet, or just, one or the other. In the process, we did also request a bid for Anniversary Park, and our park superintendent noted that Al Foster restrooms are actually probably more utilized than Anniversary Park. And so by the last bid requested for that restroom as well. So the department did not receive a response from Demeen Construction as far as heating the entire restroom, but did receive one from Authorized Electric and Waldinger Corporation. And both of those were significantly less than the original that we received from Demeen. So those were provided in your packet. These contractors did find that just providing a wall unit in the utility closet would be enough to heat the utility closet enough to be able to use it year round. They did note that they could also add a unit in the actual restroom part of the bathrooms, like in the toilet area. However, with the vents in those facilities, that it wouldn't be nearly as effective in that room as it would be in the utility closet, and sealing off those vents would help with that, but it might lead to undesired effects afterwards, given the nature of the facility. So therefore it would also be more expensive. And so although it's possible to do that, it would probably be more expensive in trying to alleviate that situation as well. And so with that, that concludes the department's presentation. And the department would recommend moving forward with heating just the utility closet only at Green Pines Park at this time, and is seeking a favorable recommendation for Authorized Electric, as it was the most cost efficient. And with the committee's action, this would be sent on to council as a recommendation. However, the department is also seeking direction as to whether or not the committee would like to perhaps proceed with either Anniversary Park or L. Foster as well. And so with that, the department is here for any questions that you may have. And should this move forward in a timely manner, hopefully we could have the restroom heated by this winter. So that is our goal here.
Okay, thank you. Ed, I got a question for the department first. So what's the thought process behind just doing the utility closet of Green Parks and not the utility closet at all three parks?
Originally, it was just because Green Pines Park was the only request that we had. And then when we got the first bid in and it was like, just under $8,000, it seemed pretty costly. But by the time we got the bids where it was only like $2,600, it seemed, to be an easier possibility to also do more than just Green Pines Park restroom.
Okay. I mean, I personally would almost be in favor of doing all three of them for less than we could do the other one originally, but I'll let somebody else do the motions. But Ed, go ahead, and Katie.
I just had a question. What's the cost to the city when we put the porta-johns out there every year?
So that was also the other thing, because at Al Foster, we definitely put out additional restrooms in the winter. And so it would save the expense of that.
So, I mean, if you looked at it for long-term, doing all three and not putting porta-johns out any longer.
Correct.
And I like the fact of not heating the restroom part, because that's going to keep people from trying to stay in there and sleep in there. And I mean, they're not heated in the porta-johns. So this is a big improvement to have running water. So I kind of think that if you were going to present this to the council,
Mhm.
I'd present it out over a 5-year period that this is less than the Porta Johns. I think it's just a good business decision to look at it that way. Just my comment.
Excellent suggestion. I'll look into the expense for the Porta Johns.
Katie, go ahead, and Scott, I got you next.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve all three, since they're coming in less or equal to the cost of one. I've had constituents at Anniversary Park come after me for not having restrooms in the winter months because they do take their kids down there all the time. So I'm a big proponent of providing amenities to our residents year round wherever possible. So I'm making a motion that we do all three, utility closet only, and get it moving ASAP.
Okay, do we get a second on the motion? Seconded by Councilmember Rambo. Okay, Scott, go ahead, please.
Well, it was just a general question. So for the bids that you have received from the contractors, confidence level that these solutions are going to have the desired effect, is that pretty high?
They seemed very confident that just heating the utility closet and just using a space heater to do so would keep that closet warm enough to be able to use the restrooms year round.
So there wouldn't be any reason why we would only want to do, say, the restroom in one of the park to see how that worked first before we moved on to do all three.
Good point.
We could do that if that's the direction that you'd like us to go.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
When this particular item was brought forward for Green Pines Park, the department contacted Ken Keitel because he does park projects in Florissant, Jennings, and other municipalities. And this particular approach has been used in Jennings and successful. And so we have a high confidence level. And if you're concerned about the contractor, Authorized Electric does all of our lighting needs throughout the city. We've been with the Authorized Electric for years and years, and we have a high level of confidence in their ability to install and do it correctly and safely.
Okay, thank you. Mike, go ahead, and then Deborah, I got you next, and then
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with Councilmember Marshall in the sense that if we're already spending money on the Porta Johns, obviously that's an expense we're already eating, and there's the more unsightly nature of having those out there and having to bring them in and take them out and what have you. So if the restrooms are already there and they can do this safely and effectively for this minimal cost, I think it definitely over time it's going to save us money. But I think the aesthetics, the whole components of you look at it from every angle, it's just a more positive experience, as well as not creating an environment where folks are going to try to hide out in there or stay in there any longer than that's necessary, and then the ventilation's still there. So to me, it's a no-brainer seemingly to just do all three at the same time. So I would support that motion that's been made.
thank you. Deborah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm just looking for clarification. So if we just do a utility closet, will the restrooms still be warm?
If I may, if we just do the utility closet, then no, the restrooms will not necessarily be comfortable. They will still be cold.
And what about the plumbing and such? Would that help? Will the utility closet help with maintaining that as well, or is it not going to be enough warmth to worry about that? I don't think I
It's
asked
the
the
purpose,
question
right?
very well, but
Heating the utility closet, the whole purpose of it is for the plumbing, so the plumbing doesn't freeze over. And so it's like a minimal warmth. This should maintain, a warm enough temperature to support the plumbing in the winter, but it is not likely going to make the actual restroom part of the facility much more comfortable, if any.
so if it's in the winter and say a 2-year-old wants to use it, is it going to be is it going to be helpful if it's just a utility closet?
It will be helpful because the restroom will be open. However, it'll be about as comfortable as a normal like porta potty. The actual restroom will still be cold, for sure.
But not overly cold. They'll still be able to use it.
Correct. They will be able to use the restroom.
Okay, thank
Ms.
you.
McCutcheon,
Yes.
by the fact that we're heating the small utility or equipment storage area, there'll be some ambient heat off that common wall.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, we didn't have indoor plumbing till I was 5, and you learn how to hover. Every woman here knows what I'm talking about. And so I don't think that's a huge concern because hey, it was what it was. We're all adults here, but the bogey is going to be power consumption. And if we tried to heat, even given the aesthetic concerns that you raised, I think it would be incredibly costly, particularly with electric heat, to try to heat basically an open space. And so we probably should get a good handle on what the power consumption is likely to be to the extent we can. A little bit of foam board insulation in the utility closet would go an enormous distance to save us money. And we probably would recoup the expense in a few months' time of this heating. I'm using myself as an example because my aunt's home has a what she called the greenhouse. She kept her plants there in the winter, but that's where the well facility is, the pressure tank, and so on and so forth. And I have a 1500 watt heater on a thermostat, and when the temperature drops down to roughly mid 30s, it kicks on and blows a little bit, and it keeps it around freezing, which means the water in the pipes is not going to freeze. So we don't have to overheat this. And so my suggestion to you is ensure that this is not overly large. We might save some money on equipment. We can certainly save money on power because we don't need to heat it to 60 degrees. That the wall between the facility and the closet notwithstanding, I just don't think we're going to be able to heat that room enough to have the heat transfer into the used space, the bathroom space, and be useful. So that's my suggestion. But I think this is a great idea, and I fully support it. So,
Okay, Scott, go ahead.
Would it be safe to say that what we're seeking here with these heaters, just enough heat to make the restroom usable in wintertime, but not so much heat that it becomes attractive to somebody who might decide to spend more cheap time?
That is the objective. It's just to keep the plumbing from freezing.
Keep the water pipe.
On the bus of the portage months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Water.
It'll have water and it's a little thicker walls. Yep. Okay, seeing no other comments or questions, we do have a motion on the floor. So all those, Mr. Lee, go ahead. Sorry. I didn't
Thank
see your hand up until you actually
didn't
raised
actually
your hand.
You're okay. I actually didn't put it up on the digital version, but the only question I had, I just wanted to look into this further myself. Is there a way we could have some kind of locking mechanism once the park goes out at night, once our hours of operations go down, where the pretty much that door could be locked? Would that be something we'd have to do manually or install something that would probably cost a lot of money? Just wanted to put the question out there because that could solve that issue of having individuals potentially taking refuge in that bathroom.
Mr. Lee, we do have electronic locks on all of the restroom doors, so we open them around 5 a.m. and close most when the park sometime after dusk.
Okay.
Thank you. Teresa, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, a lot has been said, and just clarifying for anyone that might be listening or listen to this later, that these bathrooms are still going to be very cold. They're going to be very cold in the winter and cold time. And I'm like Rob, I went to school, my school was 1 through 8 grades and we didn't have inside toilets, had no running water except for the well pump outside that we'd have to go pump to get the water out of. But yeah, the kids will get used to that. And we try to accommodate a lot of things, but a cold bathroom, I mean, I lived in China for 14 years and there is no heated bathroom in the winter time, no matter where you go there. So you will get used to it. And I think the kids won't even really notice it that much when they go because they're just concentrating on playing. But I just want them to know that it's not going to be something that's warm to go into a bathroom or even a little bit warm. It's going to be very cold in there.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions or comments, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, thank you, everyone. That takes us to the next item on the agenda under new business, the Old Pond School maintenance bids. Ms. Ripito.
Perhaps I'll show the picture at a more appropriate time this time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As you are well aware, Old Pond School is a beloved Wildwood asset. Constructed in 1914, it served the area as an educational facility until the 1960s when it was given to Rockwood School District. It was used for administrative offices and storage, but long story short, it finally went into a state of deterioration prior to it eventually being donated to the city, conditioned upon it being restored. The restoration was completed and it was open for public use in 2006. The character of this property has been praised by historic preservationists, and the building has since been placed on the city, state, and federal registries as a historically significant part of American history. And, for that and many other reasons, it's also something that we need to keep up and maintain. And there have been a number of changes that have occurred on the location since 2006, such as removal of dead trees, installation of a public sanitary sewer, stabilization of the historic wall in front of the building. And currently, as you can see from these photos, the school looks great from afar, but as you get a little closer, you can see that the fascia and the trim could use some painting, and there are some areas in which it's actually missing parts of the trim, and some of it is just damaged. So at any rate, the department looked into it and received the following bids to power wash and or repair, replace these areas as appropriate. The bids varied from the different companies between roughly around $9,000 and up to $16,000. So the city received three bids, and I would note that the bids were all well under the $35,000 that was budgeted for these particular repairs. So that is also good. And the department is requesting the committee's support in the engagement of Five Star Painting for this work at Old Pond School. It was actually the bid that came in the lowest. The bids were all for the same amount of work. And with that concludes the department's presentation. And the department would seek the committee's support in the bid from Five Star Painting for $8,992.49. And the department is here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Scott, you want to?
Yeah, question, Five Star Painting. Does the city have some previous experience working with them?
It is my understanding that we do not, unless I'm not aware of something. Our park superintendent did look through like papers that we had, but I honestly think that Gailey did most of our handiwork like this, and so we didn't find any history with any of them.
Right.
Unless I'm mistaken.
Do we know how long they've been in business, or do we know much about the company?
If the motion is approved, we'll ask for references. And before we would proceed forward with a contract, we'll check the company out, see if they've done good work and if there is any particular problems or things along those lines. So we didn't want to necessarily do all three if we didn't have to. I'm not saying we're lazy, but we just figured we usually go with low bid just because it's the purchasing or the bidding process. But we'll certainly check the references.
Perfect. Then I would make the motion that we proceed with Five Star Painting.
Okay, do we have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Any other comments or questions? Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, real quickly. Joe, did the Historical Preservation Commission look at, say, the color scheme, et cetera, on this when we originally painted it? Because white this is how I always remember the building, but it was in disrepair when I was growing up, but to the extent I paid attention. So
It's just a bit of background. We actually had a committee formed that helped with the restoration process. And on that committee were former students.
so that's what it used to look like.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, Red Kelp was on it. David Schneider, both students at the facility, and they had great stories to tell. And yeah, they all remembered. And then Ron James liked to talk about the Odd House while we were on the subject. It's not there anymore, but his goal was to build one. And he unfortunately never was able to.
Okay, well, my dad went there as well. I think you probably know that. So there's mention in here of a window that they can't repair. Are we going to repair that separately?
And as Ms. Ripito mentioned, we're going to ask Glenn Gailey probably to do that for us.
Okay, okay. There is some mention of urethane trim. Is that urethane paint or is that urethane trim? Because there's a lot of plastic trim out there that is not appropriate to this building at all.
No, we want to replace with in-kind.
Okay, all right, good.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, and coming in under budget also, that's a good thing. Next item on the agenda is disc golf course. For Glencoe Park, Mr. Boonage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, at the conclusion of the budget process in 2022, $20,000 was set aside to proceed forward potentially this year with a disc golf course down in the Al Foster Memorial Trailhead area. A design for that disc golf course was provided to the committee at that time, and there were concerns about cost. Certainly, cost is a major factor, and with that concern, the department went back to the park designer, asked for some modifications, and described what we thought would be a reasonable cost estimate, which is the $20,000 in the budget. Tonight, the department would like to proceed with the bidding and see if we can find a contractor that would do the disc golf course for that price or less. If not, the department would come back to the committee and advise that this project shouldn't proceed forward in 2023. Ms. Ripito's been kind enough to kind of pull up the plan. And as you can see, it's in the general vicinity of the trailhead. And the way the tee boxes are set, it's a 3-hole course, but the tee boxes change. There's 3 variations on each of the 3 courses. So you could do a 9-hole course in what I consider is a relatively very nice area.
Thank you. Does somebody want to make a motion? Katie, make a motion for the department to move forward. We need a second, seconded by Mr. Marshall. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Thank you, everyone.
And again, Mr. Chair, once we get those bids, we'll return them to the committee.
Great. Thank you. I'll take the next 2 items on the agenda in unison. These are typically for information items for us, but does anybody have any questions or comments for the department? Okay, seeing none, we do not have an executive session. We do have one other item under other matters for consideration. Mr. Boonage.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. As you know, we produce an agenda for each of the monthly meetings of the committee, and at the bottom of the agenda, there is always the heading, not ready for action. And in terms of a housekeeping item, the department would like to present to the committee members tonight 4 items that it believes can be removed from the not ready for action component. The first, efforts for fundraising, donations, volunteer participation, activities at Community Park. That actually was on the agenda before we opened Community Park, and we've proceeded forward, and we do have a number of different things ongoing relative to that facility. The other B is consideration of national fitness campaigns outdoor gym. That was something that was brought to us by the company. They do grants, but still the cost of it was about $75,000 to $80,000. And for that cost, we basically said, I don't think we're ready to move forward. And so the cost hasn't gotten any less expensive. The update on the Parks and Recreation Action Plan, that was completed in 2018. And then finally, discussion of municipal enforcement of code violations. That was all in the context of the changes that were promulgated by the state legislature after the Ferguson unrest. And obviously, they took much of what we can do out of our hands. And so tonight, the department would respectfully request these 4 items be removed from the agenda, and has been written by Ms. Ripto and I. Certainly, if something were to come up again, they can be added back in. Thank you.
Thank you. Does somebody want to make a motion to go ahead and have these removed? Mr. Rambo makes it, seconded by Mr. Ottenberg. Any discussions from anyone? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstention? I think everybody enjoys a little house cleaning. Yeah. That is all we have. The next meeting will be on September 19th. I'll go ahead and take an adjournment. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, this is sort of under miscellaneous, and I just don't want it to fall off the radar. Have we moved forward with the investigation of the home at Pertner Park, and whether what our options are, given that it's deteriorated more than we expected?
Yes, the park superintendent, Kristen Nager, and I sat down and we went through a list of contractors we're going to contact. And again, as directed by the committee, we're going to basically try to obtain 3 bids for demolition purposes and 3 bids for restoration. Well, for the most part, cleaning and then restoration. We hope to have those by September. If not, certainly by October.
Okay, so no preliminary assessment or anything like that?
No, and again, there's an apology in all of this, because again, we knew we had a mold problem when we accepted the property. The mold problem obviously was isolated to the dwelling. There was the leak of the well system inside. We were able to basically discover the leak. We turned off the water. We've kept it temperature monitored, but the mold just took off. And we had some plans in place. We were trying to address it with the city administrator. It just was one of those things that always kind of got less prioritized. But we'll see what we can do. Certainly, we're maintaining the rest of the property, both from a standpoint of cutting grass, ensuring that it's safe and secure. But the gentleman that went out and did the testing, he came back and said, you shouldn't be in that. It shouldn't be in that house very long at all, if any. So
yeah. Okay. All righty. Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lee.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch upon that last item, is that I also had a discussion with the individual that did that mold investigation, and it was pretty much told us that candidly that they don't think it's just going to be very expensive. So I just want to make sure the committee understands that, if we were to move forward with some type of remediation, it's practically going to need to be demoed from the inside out completely. So it would be a pretty large cost to the city. So just wanted to get that on the table, so when it comes up, it's not a shock. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? I will take a motion to adjourn. Made by Councilmember Rambo, seconded by Councilmember Ottenberg, non-debatable. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Thank you, everyone.